Okay friends, it's time to get started on our job. One of the first things that I need to mention is we're going to talk about safety. You need to make sure you have hand and eye protection at all times because we're going to be dealing with oil. Now let's go ahead and get under the hood here, and we're going to come right over to the oil cap. Go ahead and turn that counterclockwise, remove it. We're going to inspect the seal on this, make sure it looks like it's still in good condition. And then let's have a look at the top here. This is going to tell us exactly what type of oil we're going to need to have for this job. Make sure you've got plenty of it. Let's set that right here, and then we're going to make our way over to the driver's side of the engine to remove the oil dipstick. Go ahead and wipe that off. Set it aside so it's nowhere near your battery terminals. Now let's make our way underneath the vehicle, and we're going to try to find our drain plug. That's going to be located right on the oil pan itself. Obviously for this, you want to make sure you have a nice collection bucket underneath this, and then we're going to use a 13mm wrench to loosen this up. We'll let all the oil drain out, put the drain plug back in, and then we can continue. Now once that's done draining, let's go ahead and put our drain plug back in here, just so if there's any residual oil in this area, it's not going to continuously drip while we work under this area. Let's get this closed off, and then we'll continue on to removing our 10mm bolts that hold the oil pan to the engine. Now we can move along to removing all these bolts. Like I mentioned, I'm going to start with the hardest one, which is right above this front differential here. You can start with whichever one you like. Now I'm just going to go ahead and do my last bolt here. Generally, the oil pan is held to the engine with some sort of gasket maker, so you shouldn't necessarily have to worry about this falling down, but keep in mind that it could potentially fall, in which case oil might splash. There we are. Just pry that off of there gently. Like I said, a little bit of oil came out of this. Go ahead and get the oil pan right out of there. There it is, friends. Let's have a quick look at our oil pan here. If you were to look along the edges where it connects up against the engine, generally you're going to see a gasket of some sort. Overall, a lot of times these gaskets are going to be reusable. You can just go ahead and get in between the oil pan and the gasket itself, pull it up off of there, clean it off, and then reuse it. On this one right here, it does have a little bit of damage, and I don't feel confident reusing it, so I'm just going to go ahead and set this aside. We'll clean up the engine, and then we're going to continue with some gasket maker. Now to clean up the engine, generally I like to use a nice flat razor blade. I'm going to take this very carefully, and I'm just going to go right along the engine just like this. The reason why I'm doing this is because I'm trying to scrape away any of the dirt or debris that might be in this area where the gasket's going to be. Once I have everything scraped down completely, I'll continue on with a rag with some parts cleaner, and we'll wipe it down so there's no oily residue in the area. Alright, so now it's going to be time to prepare our brand new oil pan. For this, I always use a little bit of gasket maker. I like to use high temp gasket maker. I'm going to come right along this entire area here. Basically, I'm just going to make a bead coming all the way around, and once I have a bead, I'll go ahead and smoothen it out with my finger, so it doesn't necessarily need to look very pretty at this point. I'm just going to smooth this out. Just want to make sure we have a nice bead going all the way around this entire oil pan. This is what's going to seal in the oil, so it's very important to make sure you have plenty of this gasket on here. Back over at the vehicle, let's just double check the engine. As you can tell, a little bit of oil was still seeping down, and it got along the area where the gasket's going to be. Let's just go ahead and re-wipe that down again. That looks really good. Now we can continue on by installing our oil pan. Put that right up and in position here. Now at this point, I'm just going to start lining up my bolts. I'll start a few of them in here. We'll start them out. Once we have them all started, we can bottom them out, and then we'll torque them to manufacturer's specification. Now that I have them all started, I'm going to go ahead and snug them. Once you have them all bottomed out, let's go ahead and torque these to 97 inch-pounds. After all that's torqued, move along to your drain plug. We're going to torque this to 19 foot-pounds. You want to ensure that this is nice and tight. So now at this point, we have the oil pan up here. We use some gasket maker. So you want to make sure that you wait until that gasket maker is completely dried before you go ahead and add some oil. Typically, this can take approximately an hour, sometimes two. It really depends on the climate that you're in, such as maybe humidity or something alike. But since we already drained the oil, we might as well go ahead and finish up an oil change here. With that said, I'm going to move along to replacing my oil filter. So I'm going to use my oil filter wrench. We'll start removing this. Keep in mind that oil will be in it, so you want to have a collection bucket under this as well. Make sure you hold onto that oil filter so it doesn't come dropping down. and let's remove it from the area. Once the oil filter's out of there, let's have a look at that oil filter housing. You want to make sure it's clean and free of any debris or even oil that's in the area. Just going to go ahead and wipe this down. Once you have this cleaned off, let's go ahead and grab onto our new oil filter. So I've got my new filter here. I went ahead and I matched it up to the original filter. You want to ensure that you have the same diameter, and especially where this gasket is, it's going to be super important to make sure that that's the proper size as well. If it's too small, it might not necessarily fit on that base. So you want to ensure that you have the proper filter, and of course the threaded area here is super important as well. Assuming you have the proper filter, let's continue on with a little bit of the proper motor oil. We're going to use 530 in this. I'm just going to go ahead and start pouring this right into the oil filter. And essentially I want to prime this filter. So what I'm doing is I'm just putting oil into this. So when we first initially start up the vehicle, it's going to have oil in the filter already to get shot up into the engine. After that, I'll use a gloved finger. I'm going to go ahead and lubricate this gasket right here. Now we can get back over to the vehicle. At this point, it's bottomed out. I want to continue tightening this at least an eighth, if not a quarter turn. So let's just go ahead and grab onto it. I'm going to grab my filter wrench. Give this a couple last turns here. We don't want this to vibrate loose while we're driving down the road. Now at this point, you want to make sure that you don't have any oil in this area. If you dropped any oil, maybe along the sway bar or anything the like, go ahead and spray it down with some parts cleaner so that you don't have to worry about it contaminating Mother Nature. Now at this point, we let everything dry underneath the vehicle, so I'm just going to go ahead and put the oil dipstick in. Now we'll continue over here. I generally like to use a funnel for this so I don't pour oil all over the top of the engine. So I'm just going to go ahead and use a nice clean funnel. We'll start adding the proper amount of oil for this, which is 5 quarts of 5W30 oil. Now that we've added all the oil, let's go ahead and put on our cap. Make sure it's nice and tight. Double check to ensure that your oil dipstick is in the fully down position. After that, let's go ahead and start up the vehicle. All right, let's go ahead and start this up. Now that I've had it running for approximately 10 seconds, I went ahead and turned it off. I'm going to come back out here, remove the dipstick, we'll wipe it off. Make sure it's clean. Go ahead and put it back in there, and let's double check that fluid level. Now what we're looking for is to have the oil between this hatch right here and that one right there. So now that we're sure that the oil level is perfect, the next things that we're going to want to do is go ahead and close the hood. And generally I like to go ahead and take it for a short road test. When I come back from that road test, I want to take a peek underneath the vehicle and make sure I don't have any leaks. Aside from that, thanks for watching.